you're supposed to be, Joe.
Pretty good until, well,
I
first of
gave
all, when
him.
she started to sing, she always gives me cold chills anyway. And then when he went to the casket, that,
Well, I had
My
already
wife
gone
hands me
through
the
about 3
tissues.
handkerchiefs, and I just gave up. I just, you know. It was
Good evening. The school board meeting of Tuesday, August 10th, 1993 is now called to order. The first item on the agenda is adjustments to agenda. Do any board members have any adjustments? Okay, seeing none. The next item is approval of school board minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, July 6th, 1993. Are there any corrections? Okay, seeing none, the minutes stand approved. The next item is communications, and I have one, and that is that Craig Beeling, one of our newest members of the school board, has resigned. That's why he's not here tonight. Later in the meeting, we will be taking a vote to accept his resignation and to set a special election for a replacement. And sitting up here with us now is Scott Poulin, our new business manager, who's been here for a month. Do you have any communications, Connie?
No, none at this point.
None? Any from any other board members? No? Okay. The next item is superintendent's report, and I'll turn it over to Connie.
Thank you. Before I start anything else, I do just want to make a brief comment about the somewhat unusual and very moving and touching experiences that the school department's been through this day. As I think most people are aware, we had a student who graduated from school in June and who suffered an untimely accident. We did, realizing that there was going to be a very large turnout for this event, we did use the school buildings, which we normally probably would not do. I do believe anybody who was at that service this morning realized that it was probably one of the most moving experiences that many of us have been through. I would like to personally express sympathies for the family and also thank all the school staff that gave of their time and energies and genuine sympathies to make this the kind of event that it was. I was extremely impressed with our students. They were really terrific, and I just want to make a comment about that, thanks to our staff, too. Moving on. I had 3 items under my report, which I think are pretty well explained in your board packet. They shouldn't take too much time, but I'll run through them fairly quickly. At our last meeting, I was talking about the total quality meetings that we've set up, and I should note, actually I could have noted it under communications, I want publicly to thank the Unum Corporation, their education fund. They have been interested in promoting total quality activities in school systems, and we have been the beneficiary of that interest. We've had some of our staff members have gone to the sessions that they run on-site, as well as some sessions at other places such as National Semiconductor. We've all found those helpful. However, we reached a point where we felt we needed to move a step further and have some on-site consulting services, and thanks to the generosity of Unum's educational grant, we have received a $10,000 grant to help us fund that. That our intention at this point is really it's the beginning of a 2-year commitment, and we did match, not totally match, but we also put some aside from our staff development funds for this. So I want to thank Unum, and we've had 2 days of training so far. We anticipate at least 2 more of various kinds before the end of the summer session, and there will be a number of activities going on during the year. The focus will be on small action groups. I am convinced from the work that we have been doing in the system that those are the most productive. You do need some time with groups of staff just to get the general vocabulary and goals understood, but our basic work will be working in small groups, and we will certainly be looking forward to having parent and student involvement as appropriate. Parent probably more than student, but I can anticipate sometimes when students might be. And of course staff from all sections of the school department, as well as of course school board members. Unless you have some questions or comments, moving on. The next week, the Administrative Council meets for 2 days. I noted in the agenda notes pretty much what we will be reviewing. We try to do this as one day is kind of nuts and bolts, and it's a good time for us to review things. For instance, last year was our first year with a newly revised teacher evaluation instrument, and we will be looking at the timelines we used and the various forms we use, those kinds of issues. I would also say that my observation of seeing the results of the work on the administrator's part that came in, that it seemed to work very smoothly. But we will be reviewing that and making any necessary adjustments. That seems to be ongoing. There are a number of issues, of course, that have to do with financial reports or with procedures or updating policies, making sure that we are taking care of those types of, as I said, nuts and bolts things. We certainly also do want to review our board goals, the mission statement, those kinds of things that are the glue that holds us all together. And we will summarize some of our discussion and make sure that you get a report on that. And also in your packet, I sent you the Pond Cove guides, one on updating curriculum at the language arts in Pond Cove, and the other one, the one that's illustrated, which I think is charming. The illustrations are absolutely charming, illustrated by the children. A handbook of behavior expectations. We do regard both of these documents as drafts. We certainly want to have input not only from the board but from our parent community as well as our, obviously, our teaching staff. We anticipate some need for clarification and discussion, but we see this as a critical step along the way of making sure that we all understand what the basic expectations are. Been a lot of discussion this year through the diversity committee and through some of our parent groups about issues of respect, issues of context, issues of building climate. And I think that it is our hope that if we are clear with children, with parents, if we have a chance to seek a reasonable consensus as to how we will handle certain things, that I'm confident we can deal with. I think just plain getting things a little, what's the word I want? I'm sort of thinking of calmer, but I'm not sure that's the right word. So, comments?
Charlie?
When will these just be dispersed?
Beth? I know that they've been sent out.
At this point, Charlie, they are a draft, and what I'd like to do is to get some feedback from board members and from a group of parents, and then publish for this year. But that, I'm going to guess, is probably going to be right after school starts. We'll need that turnaround time to get the feedback, and I've gotten that from a few board members and some teachers and parents, in both cases with the behavioral handbook and the language arts as well.
I think the behavioral handbook should be as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Mark?
I would just like to make a couple of comments and just brief feedback on it. First of all, I'm really grateful for all the work that's gone into them. As with all draft works, there's a lot of input that goes in beforehand that we can only guess at the amount of time and commitment taken to produce those documents, and I think they're great. My only thought on the handbook of expectations is the first page was quite positive, and then from there on it seemed relatively consistently negative. And my only thought was that perhaps there could be more in terms of instruction in the first part before the consequences as to why one particular concept, for instance, respect or talking, is so important to the school system, so that kids would be able to see perhaps some of the reasoning behind the consequences that are defined afterwards. But overall, I think it's a terrific document that's going to be very helpful for students and parents to come to understand what is needed for their children to have a successful experience in school. The Language Arts Curriculum Guide also is very enlightening to be able to get a look at the whole concept together with strands going through each of the grades through Pond Cove School. I have also just completed a 200-page curriculum document for a residency program that I'm putting together, and it's an extraordinary amount of work to do this. One of the questions, or one of the things that I'd be interested in seeing from a school board standpoint, is how this curriculum compares to other curriculums and the pieces that were taken to produce our specific curriculum for Pond Cove. For instance, in developing our curriculum for our students, we borrowed heavily from about 6 or 8 different curriculums that we had seen. In the math strand, it's fairly easy to see because there's a national curriculum for math, or very near to that, and so it's very easy to see where we are. I think for parents especially, it's going to be difficult for them to be able to interpret a lot of this particular document because it uses still to some extent technical terms in terms of curriculum development. The student will demonstrate, the student will be able to synthesize, the student will integrate these concepts, which makes sense if you're well versed in curriculum. But if you're a parent who doesn't have a lot of time invested in learning the process of education, I think that may be somewhat confusing to them. So my 2 feedbacks are, 1, if we could get some idea of nationally where things are going, or perhaps other communities as ballpark figures, so we could see how we are doing compared to other communities or nationally. And then the second part is we may need to think of some concept where parents will be able to read through it, and the average parent who is not well versed in education terms will be able to understand and grasp where their students should be at any given level.
I appreciate the comments, Mark. I think that that's a layer that we still need to go through. I think that probably something that would be good to add to the whole thing at the end of the language arts would be a glossary of terms. I think that has been an ongoing issue that we've tried to deal with, to clarify, to be consistent with, and I think that there still is a need to look at it to make it as user-friendly as possible, and hopefully we can get some of that kind of feedback from parents, from a parent committee, to provide that and to look at those terms that may make sense outside of the educational world, but in interpreting it, that clarification.
Great. Thank you very much for the time you've put into both of these documents. They're really helpful and a strong starting area.
It really has been a combined K through 4 effort, and on the part of a lot of people. I think it began with the Language Arts Subcommittee back about 2 years ago, and I think with that was the initiative that began it. And we haven't arrived yet, but we're
Great. Thank you.
Beth, I just wanted to ask you, I really appreciated reading this. Was there any kind of chart done that we could look at, or for parents to see, that a lot of the categories repeat themselves? For example, spelling and reading comprehension or punctuation, and you add certain things as you go on.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was any graphic way that could be shown with the categories, and then as each grade and what you add in, or what changes from grade to grade. Because I think sometimes when you read it this way, you read it and then you read it again for the next level, and you're thinking, well, what has been added? What changed? And it might be helpful to see it.
One of the things that I think will be helpful with that is the way that it's graphically presented, and Andrew Lomack McNair has been working on that, and I think if we work with highlighting certain things for particular grade levels in particular areas, that'll be helpful, because there are things that are consistent throughout K through 4, but there are certain things that are looked at particular grade levels that they aren't at others.
Yeah.
So looking at it from the graphics point of view, it would be helpful.
I would just like to reiterate what other people have said about how much work has gone into this. I have some inkling just from being on that language arts subcommittee, and it was gratifying to me to see consistent threads. If you read through the booklet, you could really see how kids were advancing. I would agree also that some things could be clarified for parents, but I think that will come. And so I really am very pleased to see those threads. But also in your memo to us about both these booklets, you made it very clear that they were drafts and you were looking for feedback.
Right.
And I was wondering if you're planning to do the same thing when you send it out at the beginning of the year, both documents to parents, so that
Yes.
they realize
Yeah.
that these are very much ongoing documents
Right.
and they're okay.
I think that we'll make that very
Yeah.
clear, and I think I think at this point, we're not really ready to put it into, a document that's going to be costly as far as printing
Right,
is concerned. This will be a draft copy this year, and we'll go from there, because I think that we're going to discover things that we want to change as we go along.
Right.
too.
Well, thank you. That's a lot of hard work.
Just one other comment on the handbook of expectations. What I liked about it was that it was not wordy, it was concise and to the point, and I didn't get a negative feeling. So that's what I think is very readable,
Mhm.
and I don't think it's something that parents will throw away because it's not wordy.
Well, I think you would then read it with your child because it isn't wordy and go over it. It was nice.
Well, see, this is why we need parent feedback, because we
I'm sure we'll have that.
I'm sure. Thanks, Beth.
That's it.
Well done on that. Okay, moving on, the next item is school board subcommittees and reports, and the first is finance subcommittee. I'll turn it over to Peter Leslie.
Thank you, Ann. The summer is not typically a time when there's much for a finance committee to report, but there are a couple of things going on. The audit has started, and as you mentioned, this was our second meeting with Scott Poulin. The finance committee met just before this school board meeting, and I think I can say with some confidence that he's going to be able to break us in at a reasonable pace. And I'm also confident that we're going to see some improvements in organization, financial controls, financial reports, and compliance with all the various governmental and other regulations. So I think we're off to a good start, and we'll probably have more to say in September and October.
Any questions, comments? Okay, moving on, the next report is from the building committee. I'll turn it over to Connie.
Okay, we actually haven't had any building committee meeting since our last board meeting where we approved the concept design that was laid out by the architectural committee. However, in the meantime, we have had some discussion about how to really pull things together and go forward with the information programs that have been laid out by the building committee. At the moment, where those are still lining people up and gearing up and so on, I have to say that some of my informal feedback is that the community is sort of in shock over the price tag and wondering, really, is that necessary, and really, how can we possibly be needing that kind of thing? I think we have answers, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to getting as broad an audience as possible. I just want to point out, and this is the kind of data that we will try to raise to people's attention, there are similar either renovation or some renovation building committee projects going on throughout the state, and we will make every effort to give people some comparison of what it actually costs, what it's costing in some communities as opposed to others. I happen to see, and this is just from the newspaper, I don't know anything more about it than that, but a proposed middle school in Scarborough for 10.6, we're talking about renovating 2 buildings for 1,200 kids for 11.6. I mean, really, there are some economies in what we're talking about, and there are some long-range pieces here. I can deeply appreciate, I too am a taxpayer in this community, that nobody wants to absorb a large tax raise. We will do our best to pull together not only the analysis of the plan itself, but a good explanation of why this kind of major renovation is necessary. And I just want to remind people once again, we're talking about making 2/3 of our school buildings habitable for the next generation. They are not habitable now. And I think that people will understand as we get started. Mostly concurrent with the school year, we will be doing tours of the buildings on Saturdays when we can give a good guided tour. We will have slideshows, we will have pictures, we will have data, and we will truly appreciate people giving us the time so that we can explain. Anyway, that's where we are right now.
Do we want to talk about setting a workshop date on that now?
Yes, I had suggested that we could use the 24th if possible. I don't know if that's a date, that's our normal fourth Tuesday, and I think we need to have a working group. I'd like to invite to that group some people who have already come forward in a variety of capacities willing to work on this. I don't think there is any question we need a citizen group, a variety of aspects of that, so we're certainly inviting people to come. But essentially, I think it is a board issue at this point to organize that workshop. I mean, how are we going to get that information out to people?
Does anybody want to discuss that date? That happens to be a bad date for me.
I probably will not be available that day.
I will not be available.
And Mark will.
Okay. What I would ask is, okay, what I would ask is that we don't necessarily need to pin down the date right now, and we do we can take a few minutes after the meeting and kind of quickly look at what are the realities. If we can't do it as a board workshop until after the start of school for a variety of reasons, that's not going to be critical, but we do need to do it, and some of us can meet anyway and work on certain aspects of this.
I think we'll try and find a date we all can do it before.
Okay.
But there's got to be one day before school starts.
And
We'll
we,
talk about it.
we do have another date to set.
That's right.
afterwards.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it on the building?
That's it.
The next item is unfinished business, discussion of possible increase to hot lunch costs, and I'll turn it over to Connie again.
This is an item that as soon as Scott has had a chance to really come up to speed, I will very happily pass over to him. But at this point, I will summarize, and Scott, if you have anything else to add when I get through, please feel free to join in. We did have a discussion, actually it was through the Finance Subcommittee, with some reporting of that at the regular June board meeting. Some concerns because although our past year lunch program has been certainly more cost-effective than it had been in the previous year, at the same time there are some concerns about costs, and there was some discussion about raising the cost of lunch by a nickel. Frankly, in talking it over with Scott, as I noted in your agenda packet, we don't think that that's enough to do us a lot of good. We're not sure if it makes any sense to raise the price by something before we've had a chance to really analyze it, and I would recommend not doing it at this time. I think that it's simply a discussion where we are transitioning between managers. I would rather give him time to really get a handle on that before we go forward and make that change. I also would note that from Scott's experience in other school districts too, that we are above the state average. So that a good deal, of course, our high school program is a la carte. We were not talking about that. We're talking about our basic hot lunch. So unless you have some discussion or would like to ask some questions or call to Scott's attention, anything that any of you are interested in commenting on, that's my recommendation.
Who sets the à la carte prices? Does that ever come before the Finance Subcommittee?
I don't.
I've never seen it come
No,
before.
not in my experience.
That's been set by the food service director and the business manager in the past.
I think it's something that it should be shared with the Finance Subcommittee.
I would agree with that. I think one of the things is, with food service, one of the things that you have to look at is the efficiency in which you're operating your kitchens. And we really need to take a look at what we're doing for labor costs and how we're actually preparing the meals during the course of the day, and do a labor study in the kitchens before we go increasing 5 cents per meal. That's a pretty standard practice to increase 5 cents each time there's a deficit in a lunch program. But I think really, as Connie stated, we need to do a labor study in our kitchens first, and also a study of our bid process on how we're purchasing our food products and paper products.
With that brief amount of feedback, I wholeheartedly endorse the superintendent's recommendation that we wait until we have further information from Mr. Pullen.
Any other comments?
Same here.
Okay, we don't have to vote on this,
No,
right?
no, I just was picking up on it since the issue had been raised earlier, and I didn't want to leave it unattended to.
I'm sure all our parents will be delighted. Lunches are staying at the same price.
Brown bag, peanut butter and jelly.
Okay, the next item is new business, and the first is to accept the resignation of Craig Beeling and establish a date for the special election for the board vacancy. So do I hear a motion to accept Craig's?
I move we accept Craig's resignation, and we set November 2nd, is that the date? Which would coincide with the state and national
Yes,
elections.
yes.
Which is what the town council is going to do, I understand, with the post that it's done.
That's correct.
The second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? 6-0. Okay, the next item is goals for the 1993-94 school year, and I guess I'll turn it over to Connie.
Well, I included in your packet a summary of what I had received so far, and then I also in the blue notes, for anybody that might possibly be listening to that and wondering what I'm talking about. Superintendent, I'm sure the business manager does the same thing. I don't know if he uses blue paper or not. For purposes of trying to give the members of the school board some explanation, I write up little comments of one kind or another, explanations, and they wind up on blue paper, so that's what the blue notes are. Not exactly like blue laws or, whatever. Anyway, I did also explain there that Ann and I had sat down and reviewed these. We also looked at past years, and then again, we looked at our mission statement, which is really only a little over a year old now. What our sense is, obviously you can speak for yourself, but in trying to summarize that, we really see a few major issues forming a kind of cycle. Things that people identified through the mission statement process, and to try to pick up on that, I attempted to sort of arbitrarily put them under darker print, what I thought perhaps was a major issue, and place some of the other items that you raised, suggesting that they're really related. They're aspects of that problem or that issue. I will be discussing this with the administrative group next week. Again, we will be trying to make sure that this is a manageable group of objectives. We also want to make sure that we aren't starting new directions, that we are simply staying with the directions that have been identified. I think we need a boiling down process, and I'm really looking for feedback and directions on what your reactions are to this statement. I did include a short paper from me, which is not a goal issue. It's just trying to give you my feeling for what I see as a major role of the school board setting the agenda, and how difficult that can be, that each major item requires a lot of work, not only to clarify what it is people really want out of that, but also to make sure that we don't start something one year and kind of veer off to the side the second year. School improvement, it has a history, and we have to be fairly consistent in what we're trying to do. So I think that many of the issues that were raised are sort of related, and I would like some help in simply listening to your input as to where you think you have priorities.
Okay, who wants to start?
I'll start. I felt that the building issue is really important for us for the fall, that we really need to focus on that and devote a lot of energy to it, because if it doesn't pass and we didn't do our job of educating everyone to the best of our ability, I think we will all have felt that all of that work, needs to be justified.
I don't know that I can prioritize among the few major goals that we've identified for last year and this year. I think that the concept of identifying the few major areas, which include the building needs, diversity and respect issues, and curriculum enhancement in the concept and the framework, the overall framework of TQM. I can't differentiate between those, but I think that those are good, solid goals that we should continue to pursue underneath each of those umbrellas.
I guess my dilemma with this is, I read through these goals, and most of them are things that we can't do, but we can only kind of help the administrators and Connie and everybody else to do. And I guess what I'm wondering is, what is the best way for us to help the superintendent and the administrators to carry these out and to report back to us, so we have some idea that some of these things are actually going on. We've tried various things in the past, having reports on specific issues at board meetings, having workshops on particular issues, and that process never seems to really carry through in any consistent way on any particular topic. So I've been giving some thought to it, and I don't have any magic answer yet. And I don't know if anybody else has thought about that also, or if they haven't, would they? Because we've got to find some way of boiling this down, because most of this, really, we don't do. We want it to be done, but we can't do it. And I don't know what the best way is for us to facilitate the process.
Maybe possibly working with the administrators to identify who is responsible for these and that they are going to carry them through in a time plan to do it. There are a lot in here if you look at them all individually, and maybe we have to be realistic and work with the administrators to select the ones that we would be.
Well, also, that's why I think the administrative council workshop might be a good opportunity to get feedback from the administrators about what's doable, what kind of timelines are reasonable, what kind of personnel and resources they need, so that, that could help us sort out, too, what's most important to us. But I do think we need to have some way of having things reported back to us, because I think sometimes a lot of good things are going on in the building and a lot of progress is being made that people simply are not aware of. So I think it would be positive to do that.
Well, one of the things that just popped into my mind, which is not always that adept, is the concept of the TQM being two-way streets and both being each other's customers. One of the things that I haven't heard from the administrators is feedback about us, about things that we do that are perhaps facilitate achievement of goals, and things that we do that are particularly annoying or obstructive in trying to accomplish the goals that we all have in common. And I would say that I would have interest in receiving individual feedback from all the administrators if any was inclined to spend the 5 minutes to jot it down and send it to me. Because I think we are all in agreement, or I think we all believe that we all have a common purpose. And I don't think anybody doubts anybody's intent or their concept that we're all working to try to do the right thing for kids' education. And we offer enormous loads of feedback to everybody else, but we don't really get a lot of feedback from the school system. We get it from parents, and we enjoy that sometimes and don't enjoy it much as you do. But I'd be very interested in either the board as a whole or me specifically getting feedback from administrators of how we could facilitate achieving goals that we have in common.
Yeah, can I just say, you can come on up if you want to come up, Beth. But one thing that was in my goals was to open up some different lines of communication besides this. I mean, this format really stinks as far as communicating with people. It really does. To have us sit up here and to have you, sit out there and be, called up to talk to us is not, the most natural, constructive way of dealing with a lot of the issues we're dealing with. Because I agree with Mark, we're really after the same thing, but this isn't necessarily the best environment. And if we could work on some other ways, maybe not formal workshops, but other working groups or some way to get feedback back and forth on a more natural level, I would like that a lot.
Yeah.
There was an opportunity, I think, last year when we were dealing with moving fourth grade to Pond Cove and kindergarten to the high school, so there were a lot of opportunities to talk amongst us, and formal and some less formal. It might be helpful to set a time at the beginning of the year, or at least within the first semester, the first quarter, to come in and to talk with the administrators. At least it certainly would like to do that at Pond Cove, and I think that might be a way. There are also opportunities maybe at team meetings to be present.
Okay, well, that would be useful, because I think nobody wants to intrude on the day-to-day workings of the school or micromanage what's going on at all, but I would love to have the opportunity, I'm sure other people would too, to once in a while just be able to sit down and just talk about issues informally. You know, and that is not to come to every team meeting or everything that you're doing, but just once in a while, I think it would be helpful
Oh,
to
we
all
would
of
welcome
us.
it.
Rosemary?
I would like to second that. There's only one teaching staff member here, but I think that in addition to the administrators, the teaching staff may want to speak with us in an informal or one-on-one or one-on-seven or whatever. And I would also like to encourage that, because the communication does not have to be in a position where people are under cameras and whatever. In fact, I'm far more comfortable on the phone or, you know, one-on-one, and I imagine I'm not that different from most people about that aspect.
I think there's a lot of progress that can come out of ongoing kinds of conversations, and that's what we need to begin.
I've had occasion to, in the 6 years that I've been in the system, meet with the board a couple of times with my colleagues in an informal arena, and we have always found that to be very productive. And in the past, I've done the same with other boards in other systems, even to the point of a formal 2-day retreat off-site. And each time, both parties come back with a rather renewed energy and spirit for the coalition that we really do represent. And whenever I hear that comment from a board member, I always leap up to say, yay, let's consider this, because it is very productive for us.
Don't we have a problem with that these days as far as?
Well, the sunshine laws require us to have a retreat in quotes that are open. I mean, there have been some, in fact, Wayne, you and I both remember the situation with Superintendent Augusta. Remember when he had his retreats. But that doesn't mean we can't have meetings. It's just that the concept of a retreat, some places try to do it where you kind of go to let your hair down, have some conversations off camera, and so on. Papers tend to pick up on those things, and it has happened in this area a couple of times. Reminding boards that as soon as we have a quorum, we have an obligation to have some kind of public notice that this is a meeting going on, and that the press, as well as any public interested party, has a right to attend. And that kind of gets in the way sometimes of that notion of retreat. However, I certainly don't think that gets in the way with the spirit of getting together, and we may well decide. We were talking about having some discussions of goals and the realities and so on. What we may need to do is all of us look at our calendars and chunk out some time, whether it's 2 days or not, whether it's off-site or not, and simply spend some time sitting down and invite the press if they want to come. It would be, in some cases, it would probably be very interesting. I think that we do this in pieces, but we haven't done it in a necessarily organized way, and I think that is all good information.
Other comments? It seems pretty clear that communication is a pretty big issue here. I think we should work on it pretty soon. I do think the idea, whatever we can do, however we can work it out, to get a chunk of time like that, I think would be useful.
Good.
So is that enough guidance for now?
Well, it's enough to take me the next step. Seems like this process does take a while, but I think it's worth it, and
Yep.
I appreciate the input.
Okay, the next item is the teacher's recertification plan, and I'll turn it over to Connie again.
Well, you have in your packet the updated versions. Mary Bruns is, in fact, our certification person who it also incidentally does serve with the Area Administrative Recertification Group. And these are basically the same, certainly some details different, but the basic spirit of the thing. What was a direct result of the Educational Improvement Act of 1985. I forget the exact date. I'm looking at Nancy Hutton, who was involved with that. 84. I think the original legislation was 84, and then there were some things, you're right, that came out for the 2 subsequent years. It really is kind of interesting to realize that until this legislation, we certified teachers by sending, each of us independently sending up our 6 credit hours to a gentleman in the certification office, and that's basically how you get certified. There were some alternative plans, but the idea of teacher involvement in professional staff development and so on was really backed a lot by this legislation. Like a lot of other great ideas, it suffers from, on a statewide basis, from some of the feedback I've heard, from the difficulties presented by getting enough resources to do it well. I happened to be a facilitator for a group of beginning teachers who were invited to a select seminar in June, and it was absolutely fascinating to me to listen to these young teachers talk about certification or support teams in their various districts as if they were almost night and day. In districts where the system worked well, and I would say from everything I know about this one, this district clearly has taken the time and effort, and the people involved have really struggled to make sure that it's taken very seriously and done as well as we can. It is invaluable to young teachers starting out. On the other hand, in districts where they are either strapped by geographical issues, sometimes you have a very small school with only a handful of people in it, and you're 10 miles or more away from the nearest school and so forth, there can be a number of issues, including simply not thinking it's all that important. And the teachers who did not have particularly good support teams really felt cheated. It was very obvious in their conversations that they felt this is what they had expected, this is what they had been told in their teacher preparation programs that they were going to get. Why wasn't it happening? So I guess it's another one of those issues that when we talk about restructuring education, of course it's time and resources. And of course it's time in the sense of how do we stretch people and not take time away from student learning. A major issue that we want to really tackle head on with one of our TQ action groups. But I just take this opportunity to point out that this is a pretty, I think, bold and sound piece of legislation. Unfortunately, like a lot of other things, I'm not sure it's sufficiently funded. We struggle here, and by and large, thanks to the goodwill of everybody, I think another advantage we have is that we have 3 large buildings. We do not have a whole bunch of little buildings with people scattered around, so we are able to work. I also point out that in our revised teacher evaluation instrument, you may recall, we do pay a small stipend. I'm not sure that it really represents real dollar return for people's investment. We do see it as an incentive, and it certainly does help making people feel that that is a valued activity. So that's the teacher certification. The administrative certification is an area group that is, we're in the same group with, Nancy, help me out, we're Portland.
Scarborough
And South Portland, okay. Having recently gone through that process myself, I think it was a very useful, helpful process and relatively painless. At least, I just encourage people to, it takes a little time, but it encourages reflective practice. If you looked at that, you will see that you do have to sit down and write and think about and plan. And when we talk about goal setting, who's going to be responsible for what, all of these documents, in one way or the other, have timelines. And going through the certification process should be teaching people how to think about planning that you don't just have some vague notion, that it does get broken down into specific steps. And frankly, I think we've all found that helpful. So I recommend adoption. I don't think there aren't any hidden whammies. Yes, when we commit to teacher certification, yes, we are committing some resources, but I think that they are reasonable. You know about them through the budget, or at least through the teacher evaluation and negotiation process. And I also think that the payoff is enormous.
Do I hear a motion?
On both?
We can do them together,
Sure.
can't we?
Okay, I move we accept the administrator recertification renewal plan and the Pond Cove language arts.
No, we don't need that one.
Certification plan for teachers, okay, Elizabeth, as presented.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor? 6-0.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to personnel requests. Connie?
Okay, we do have a resignation in your packet. Jill Blackwood, I think we had informed you that we were sure that this was going to happen, but she, before our last board meeting, did not have the final word, so we didn't have her letter of resignation. I'm happy to say that she's already started her new position, and she's giving us excellent feedback about, it's going something that she's really feeling very positive for. I am sure that she will make a fine administrator. I'm a little sorry to see her in another district at this point, but at the same time, we wish her well. And that's the only resignation I have.
So we should do these all separately then.
Yeah, I think I need to separate out this. Why don't we do this one first? We may have another one depending on how this goes, but
Hear a motion, Rosemary?
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the resignation of Jill Blackwood.
Second? Beth? Any discussion? All in favor? 0.
And moving on, we have request for leaves of absence. The first one is the request from Leslie Knowlton, who is a part-time kindergarten teacher for us. She is requesting a maternity leave, which the contract, of course, as well as now state and federal law, certainly give her. In addition, she's noting she expects that maternity leave will start in November, and that or late October, and that she is also asking, once the 8 weeks of maternity leave itself is finished with, to ask for an unpaid leave for the rest of the school year. So that is, the vote would be for the unpaid child care leave, which I don't know exactly when it would start, but it would be for the second semester and no doubt part of the first.
Okay.
Basically, those are pretty much contract items.
Hear a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we grant the request for an unpaid leave following a compensable maternity leave for Leslie Knowlton.
Do I hear a second? Beth? Any discussion? All in favor?
Just a question.
Your
Do you think that she will be leaving before November 6th?
I don't know.
2 weeks
It
before.
says
Two-
2
2
weeks
weeks.
before.
Right, the usual provision is 2 weeks before and 6 weeks after, or a total of 8 weeks. Of course, the baby will have something to do with it.
I just wonder how prudent it is if she didn't just submit a leave of absence starting September 1st so that we could provide a substitute teacher. I wonder what impact, 6 weeks of school is going to have on those children. And then a change of teachers. We talk about this being a very important year for children when they're coming into the school system and getting a positive impression of school, and yet we have a kindergarten teacher who doesn't seem to be taking that into consideration. I'm not that I'm against her having to leave, because that's a legal obligation, but I wonder how prudent it is for her to even start the school year and not just request a leave of absence for the year.
Well, the crux of that issue legally, the law, contract, and our general practice, of course, recognizes paid maternity leave up to the extent that you have accrued sick leave. But you don't get a lump sum for having a baby. For instance, if you are, a teacher has a baby in the summer, that does not mean that there's a lump sum of money that goes for those weeks. It is tied to sick leave because it is, in fact, an allowable condition that gets in the way of your being able to report to work. In other words, you may not actually be sick, but it's counted as sick leave because at a time when you should be reporting to work, you are unable to do so because of the maternity condition. In other words, it is tied directly to being unable to report to work at a time when you would be expected to report to work. Other than so that the aspect really boils down to some degree to one's rights to that period of paid employment.
She's a part-time
Part-time,
kindergarten
that's
teacher.
correct.
What happens in the second semester, or the second half of the year? Does she flip
You mean the time?
her time so that she would have the same children in the afternoon? I just want to make sure that we don't involve one set of class having essentially 3 different teachers in a year.
No, I didn't think we did.
She has the same group throughout.
No other comment, I just,
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, all in favor? 6-0.
Thank you. We have an additional request for leave of absence, and I just received these this morning, so unfortunately, you haven't had a chance to see them, although in the Blue Notes, again, I did reference this issue since I had been informed that it was likely to happen. What you have here is a copy of a letter addressed directly to me. Then you have a letter that is addressed to me and the school board. This is from Joanne Dowd, who has been with us for 1 year at the 8th grade level. She has been offered an opportunity, as her letter explains to you, to work for 1 year as a Foxfire teacher, in the term they use here, out of the classroom. We are members of the Southern Maine Partnership, through which she has also been involved with a number of training sessions, and she's been offered this opportunity. As her letter explains, and since you haven't had a chance to read it, I'll simply go down with you. I'm very excited about taking my classroom skills in the training I participated in this summer, both in teacher leadership and advanced Foxfire skills, and using them to help others across the Southern Maine Partnership, which includes 2 teachers at Pond Cove who are taking the course this summer and are very excited to get going in the fall. I understand it would be an unusual occurrence to grant a leave of absence to a non-tenured teacher, having only been in the system for 1 year. However, I will be supporting teachers in this system, amongst others, and serving as a teacher to teachers. I feel after this 1 year, I will be able to return to my classroom with even more to offer in ways of skills and also specific strategies to support other teachers. I would appreciate your consideration in this matter a great deal. The position is truly a 1-year position. There is no chance it will extend, as the intent is to cycle teachers out of their classrooms to help others and then go back into the classroom the next year so someone else has a chance. That is her letter, and depending on what your decision is on the leave, she sent me a second letter, which we don't need to get into unless, in fact, you intend to. Depends on which way you go, I guess. I did also, for your information, send you a copy of the current contract, which does discuss leaves of absence. And the piece, there isn't any exact language to cover this kind of situation, but I would call your attention to paragraph 12-7. Any teacher on a continuing contract may be granted at the sole discretion of the board leave for any reason for a period up to 1 year without pay or increment. Such leave may be extended for a period up to 1 year without pay or increment. It does say continuing contract. That does not necessarily mean that you cannot grant Joanne's request. It is simply another evidence of the fact that it is normally granted to teachers who are on continuing contract. I certainly want to say that it's clearly a very good opportunity for Joanne, and it is a reasonable request for a teacher to make. In many cases, if she were on continuing contract, I would simply more or less expect us to do this. It would be very much like an ISG, a teacher who's released for a year paid through the university system at a current level. There was no cost to us. The difficulty with a one-year teacher is that you then fire another one-year teacher, and at the end of that year, you have 2 one-year teachers. There's no seniority accruing on a leave, and it could possibly present us with some problems. So in all fairness, I felt that you needed to be told those things and make a decision.
That was my question. What does it do to her probationary status?
The contract, I believe, makes it pretty clear that it's not, a leave of this nature does not add to one's probationary status. You're still a probationary teacher and have to do the second year. That language, however, is in the contract in the area that talks about maternity leave. I assume that at least it's in that area. It doesn't say specifically, but would be my understanding that that's how it would be interpreted. In other words, you don't gain any, when it says increment, my understanding is that it means it doesn't, also there's no accrual of seniority.
That's what it says under 12.9.2.
Well,
But
yeah.
that's apparently, yeah, talking about those other kinds of leave and not a leave for this type of purpose.
Well, I have several thoughts. I'm not sure that I want to discuss all of them in public, but I'll take a crack at one of them. If somebody submitted me a letter of resignation and a letter for a request for a leave, I would make the decision probably based on whether or not I wanted to recruit that person back, or try to recruit that person back at the end of the year. And I would weigh that against the point you just made. Well, what would happen if I hired somebody for 1 year and I like that person better? They're both good, but I like the second one better. Well, it's a rather difficult
It is.
decision, and in the absence of any contractual language, I just wonder how much of that line of, reasoning we want to, or is appropriate to discuss publicly.
Well, isn't that maybe one of the points of why it's in the contract like this, so you don't get in that situation with a probationary teacher coming back? I mean, it's very easy with a continuing contract teacher, but it gets rather complicated, and also, it seems to me, if you extend it, in this case, and this is certainly a worthy program, and very good for her professionally and good for the system, but it just opens up a whole other category of teachers who will be asking for leaves, and we have quite a few of those already.
Would we agree that if the request for the leave of absence at this time were so that the person could take a year off to pursue some personal matter or activity totally unrelated to education, that we would say, well, we accept your resignation? We would all agree with that, wouldn't we? Would we?
I would.
Well, we had a situation like that.
I think that would be
I mean, that-
And,
more
some
likely.
people voted one way and some another.
Yeah, it would be more
But-
likely.
Rosemary?
My question is the language silent intentionally or by omission?
I do not know, Rosemary.
No, I think that in contracts, you continually find that situations are simply not provided for. I think this is one of them, and I don't think there's an intention one way or the other. I think this is a rather unusual case because the teacher is going into education, into an activity that's related to our school. If she were going to study, I'll end up using some inappropriate example, but, pursue a personal activity, I don't think we'd be discussing this, would we?
No. No,
Well, I think what we have to go by is our contract language. I think we're causing ourselves all kinds of problems if we try to interpret whether this is a worthy cause as opposed to another one when the contract specifically states that continuing contract teachers may be granted a leave at our discretion. It doesn't say anything, it specifically says continuing contract teachers.
Well, in the, if the parties are in agreement, they can agree on anything.
That's right, but but I'm thinking, we're sitting here talking about one case, and next week we could be talking about another case, or next year, or 3 months from now, and I'm just thinking about the precedent that we set by not following the language.
I think the precedent argument is a good one.
But I think 12.9.2 covers probationary teachers. That's saying that you would not approve a leave It just states that that year they leave us has nothing to do with their probationary status.
Well, I think, Charlie, those are in 9.2, they're referring to things like military leave, things to which teachers have rights. Is that correct?
It doesn't
That's-
specify.
It doesn't
That's
specify.
how-
It does not specify. It's a very open.
Well, but it's talking about all these kinds of leaves, and the only
Mhm.
time it's talking about continuing contract is these other unnamed leaves. And, you know, that to me makes it clear. But, Mark?
The reason for requesting the year off certainly has merit, but I think that it will have merit even if a leave of absence is not granted, which is to say that if the teacher is still interested in pursuing educational activities in our school system, they are certainly free to apply and would only be a stronger candidate after this year, so would be expected to be somebody that we would look very closely at. And so from that standpoint, I would be inclined to encourage her to take this opportunity, since it's not something that's always available to her. On the other hand, from a school system standpoint, I don't feel compelled to limit our options at this time. And I think that we could still have the same options next year without granting a leave of absence, and that's what I would be inclined to do.
Rosemary?
Is this position contingent, I would suggest by the last letter that it isn't, but contingent upon her current employment? And although the university and the partnership is paying the cost to the system, is she allowed to have fringe benefits accruing during that year if she doesn't have?
I don't know what the fringe benefit situation would be. I did have a conversation with her. I also had a conversation with a woman at the university who was in charge of this, who was quite aware that this would create a problem. She was apologetic in the sense that this was something that they didn't know they had funding for. There had been some discussion, et cetera, and frankly, the final word on it didn't come through until, let's say, Tuesday. I think it was like last Friday. So that we were all a little apologetic about the rush and so on and so forth. It is clear to me from that conversation that Joanne will be offered the job whether she is on leave or not. We did have a quick conversation about benefits. I was not exactly sure what the arrangement would be. She will, if she's not on leave, she would then, I would assume, be an employee of the university where they would deal with that issue. But frankly, Joanne was going to look into it, but I don't know the answer to that.
And then my last comment. I was on the interview committee when this teacher was hired, and she was hired in part because of the Foxfire approach. And if I were making the motion, I would make one to accept. And I just thought I would leave you with that so I can listen to the rest of this discussion.
Charlie?
I just wonder at this point in time, what options out there for teachers are we going to get good prospects at this point in time? And I'd rather have an ace in the hole of having this person possibly coming back if we don't get a good candidate.
Well, we have already advertised for the replacement for Jill Blackwood, and so we have a chance to see what some possible candidates who are available. And additionally, we had advertised for a one-year social studies position, similar certification at the high school, and again, that gave us some possible candidates. Either way, we have to advertise for this opening anyway, whether it's 1 year or not. The usual question as to the 1 year is, does that limit the pool? I would assume that in many cases it does, but the pool's going to be, by nature of the fact this is August, whatever, it's going to be limited anyway, whatever we do. And the answer to your question is whether we would be losing what we know to be a good teacher. I simply don't have an answer to that.
Any other comments?
Well, I think that, to me, and I feel I'm flying blind to some extent or completely because I don't know this teacher. But if, I'm inclined to accept the argument that we're in a slightly better position by giving her the leave of absence of getting her back. And I think that we should do everything we possibly can to encourage people moving back and forth among different parts of the educational system, because I think that is an enriching experience for the individual from which we end up benefiting.
I agree.
Well, I'll just say, I really think we ought to stick with our contract language, because we just open ourselves up to any number of possibilities that, may look equally appealing. And I don't think we should set the precedent, and I think in some senses, it doesn't matter who the particular teacher is. We have to have a system under which we operate, and she certainly, knew what the contract language was when she took the job, and I grant that it would be good for her, and it would probably be good for us, but I think in the big picture, we're just asking ourselves for a lot more of these ambiguous situations, and I just think we should follow the contract language. Any other
I don't
comments?
think the contract precludes this. It does not provide for it,
No,
but it doesn't preclude it.
That's correct.
I do think that's a key point, that it might have been an omission, or it might have been by design, that it is not addressed, but we don't know that tonight.
I don't think it was by design. I think it was by omission.
Then,
Do
I'll make
you
a
think the
motion. I would-
intention was to have any
I don't think
teacher
I don't think it was
any year
ever
ask for
addressed.
leave?
No, I don't think it was ever addressed. I would have one concern. If there is some additional cost by maintaining this person on leave of absence, then I would have a problem.
And is there?
Now I'm
No.
thinking, well, if she's on leave, she's on our fringe benefits. Correct, Scott?
I can't give you the answer to that right now.
Okay, but that's my understanding of it, at least to the degree of, I think we would still have the obligation under the contract for our match for benefits. Yes.
but you could make a motion to say that the candidate on leave would assume all costs of fringe benefits.
Yeah,
I'm not sure we
I
can
would
do
only
that.
support it on that basis. I don't, in this circumstance.
I think I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to answer that question in better detail, but I have some past history in my mind kind of swirling around back here. I am not entirely sure that if she is on leave, she is still a member of this unit, and she is still entitled to certain benefits. Now, it is possible that there would be some way in which you could work that through, but I don't have the information exactly what that would be. Because I know that when we have people on leave, in a variety of ways, yeah.
It's like the ISG program, and I don't know that it is, but when Wayne and I were ISGs, the state paid for our benefits.
They pay for your
We
benefits too.
still remained as a membership of the benefit package here, but
Oh,
they
okay.
covered the cost.
Okay.
But
Okay, and I
I
would,
don't know if this program's exactly like that.
well, I don't either. That was the kind of thing I'm sort of rattling around in my head. But my conversation with Marilyn, the woman in charge of this, led me to believe that it was on a similar footing. But again, that one piece, I can't tell you the absolute answer to.
Well, I would make a motion that we accept, based on it not costing us any money in terms of having to pay $4,000 or $5,000 of fringe benefits. I don't know whether. Okay, I don't have that. As I say, I was flying blind. I don't know the amount, but is that motion inappropriate?
Oh,
Is that
no, I
motion
was just letting you know how
inappropriate
much
this
it
time?
was.
Yeah, I would make a motion that Foxfire or USM or whoever would pick up her fringe benefits, even if she remains in our group. I mean, I think she can remain in our group. I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Four. All opposed? Two.
Okay, well, we will
Put away mine.
accept it, let her know. Okay. And I will clarify all those details. The next item, the new teacher assignments, we have both a sheet with what the positions are as well as some background information about them. The positions are grade 3, one-year position, Mary Dulac, special education, middle school, 1 half-time, Tammy Lynn Stanley, grade 7, Craig Roberts, high school art photography, 1 half-time, Peter Schellenberger, and high school social studies, one-year position, Dwight Ely. And we did try to include some capsule histories of these people to give you a sense of their educational background as well as their experience.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
I move to accept the positions of Mary Dulac, Tammy Lynn Stanley, Greg Roberts, Peter Schlessenberger, and Dwight Ely for the 93-94 school year.
Second?
I do have a question now. I understand that the art photography position, there was some question on his certification.
That's correct. I understand he is is in process of getting the kinds of answers. We held this off for a month while he was getting those answers for us, but I'm comfortable that he is, that has been taken care of, or is, of course, if I find it isn't, that's something that he can't be certified, although my understanding now is that he has done the necessary paperwork. He will probably be in a portfolio approach. In other words, we do hire people who don't have their full certification, who do in fact, however, once they've satisfied the state requirements, they've started their endorsement and so forth. That's my understanding where he is.
Okay, are we ready to? You had seconded it, okay. All right, all in favor? 6-0.
Co-curricular positions, we do have an amendment. I understand we've had a sheet in your packet that added what a difference an A makes. So actually we have some changes here. Change for co-curricular positions for the 93-94 school year. We had already appointed Jill Blackwood as 7th grade team leader. She, of course, will not be able to fit that into her multiple duties this year. So we are changing that to Bev Bisbee, 7th grade teacher. And we are correcting what we brought to you for math team, grades 5 and 6 with Steen Conley, and it should have been a shared position, so we would note that amended, and it would be 1 stipend split. We're not asking for 2 stipends. And the nomination for athletic fee positions for the 93-94 school year, boys JV soccer, Ben Raymond, girls JV soccer, Peter Braun, golf, Scott Meyer. Is that pronounced Meyer? Mayor. Sorry, I don't know. Mayor. And house manager Sam Boothby, and we would ask for a change in 8th grade boys soccer from Scott Shea to Craig Roberts.
Rosemary?
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the superintendent's nomination for co-curricular positions for the 93-94 school year as read.
I second that.
Any discussion?
I do have a question. Is Scott Shea going to be doing any kind of sport this
As
fall?
I certainly expect, excuse me.
I think he's going to take the fall season off with that change.
Okay,
Continue coaching winter and spring.
okay.
Any other questions? All in favor? 6-0.
May I ask a question? Nancy, are there any plans, since we just granted the leave to your 8th grade team leader, for a team leader, or is that going to be a long process?
Phone calls out.
Them to you or you to them?
Me to them.
Okay.
last item is consideration of changes in long-term substitute pay.
And that was my last item in the blue notes. I noted that in reviewing our policy, which, by the way, we have a policy on, and then an administrative guidelines. The administrative guideline that I'm calling to your attention here and asking to add the stipulation, I think I have the language right now here. If the long-term assignment is known to exceed 1 semester in length, pay will be at the appropriate step on the teacher index. You may recall that a year or so ago, you revised these administrative guidelines, and that what we have listed here, 6 weeks or more, will be paid at the BA base rate. We are not asking at this point to change that, but we are asking, in interest of all fairness and also in interest of making sure that we can find a suitable substitute. If it is more than 1 semester, we really are talking about somebody who is working virtually, depending on exactly what the circumstances are, close to a year. We feel that it would be advantageous for us to have that additional stipend available, so that over 1 semester paid at the, whatever the appropriate scale is, step of the index.
Okay, so do we need to vote on this?
Yes.
To change this tonight?
Well, it would be in addition to the administrative guidelines that we now have.
It would also require changing the 6 weeks or more to something more
That's right,
specific.
6 weeks or more, but less than 1 semester, or not exceeding 1 semester.
Yeah.
Although if we change that wording, would we like to leave our option to offer either BA base rate or the appropriate step on the teacher index and leave it at the discretion of the superintendent? Or do you want to be compelled every time there's greater than 1 semester?
I'll tell you, this is not an area where I want discretion.
Okay.
I would like to have a
Answers the
policy
question.
that says, from the standpoint of the board, we spent some time originally looking at this from the standpoint of what area school districts did. And we found that there were very few, in fact, I think we only found 1 at that time, that had been paying long-term subs on the regular scale, and they claimed for money reasons they were stopping doing that. We can certainly, as part of our annual update of this, when Scott has a chance, we will double-check that, because this is an area, sub-pay is an area where I like to make sure that we are in line with what the area towns that we tend to compete for substitutes. We certainly want to be competitive. But the conversation at the time when we amended this originally was that we were out of line, in some cases, with what other people were doing. We want to keep checking that. Right now, this is a specific one that I want to add, and we may be back as part of our annual review, but that's my suggestion right now.
The new language is the 6 weeks or more BA base rate.
No, the new language is, what you have right now is 6 weeks or more BA base rate. There was no discussion originally of what happens if we have a long-term sub that exceeds 1 semester. Now, what we're adding is a term that would be exceeding 1 semester but less than 1 year. And that would require us to spell out 6 weeks or more not exceeding 1 semester. So we're really adding another step. If this long-term sub-assignment is more than 1 semester, it will be paid on scale.
Okay, but that language we do not have here.
We do not have it. That's an addition.
How long is a semester?
Oh, a semester is 18 weeks? 18 weeks.
Mark?
I move that we amend the administrative guideline for long-term and short-term substitute professional staff employment to 6 weeks to 1 semester at the BEA base rate, and then they add the provision, if the long-term assignment is known to exceed 1 semester in length, pay will be at the appropriate step on the teacher index.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Mark, in your word, you said known to, but it might not be known, it may just develop into. So is our intent,
No, here's the language.
Okay.
I'm just asking, I don't know.
Well, The,
Example, maternity leave.
this is true. I mean, I certainly know we have these kinds of situations. My general sense of this is, I mean, and there are various ways in this get played out. That is an area, frankly, where I do have to have some discretion. I mean, we may have somebody who comes in and then somebody is all right for 2 weeks and then somebody comes back in again. Where do we start the term? And we do have to have some elasticity there. I think we can operate under that language.
Second? Ms. Merritt, any further discussion?
Just
Charlie?
clarification of the motion. What we're adding is 6 weeks at the base rate. Is it 6 weeks to 1 semester? or-
Right.
Okay, at the BA base rate.
Right.
And if it exceeds the base rate?
If
I
it
mean,
exceeds
this
one
one
semester,
semester, then, okay.
then it kicks into the index
Okay.
rate.
Does it go back retroactively if unknown events keep,
I think
Well,
that's where you wanted discretion, right?
Yes, it seems to me, I mean, I'm just thinking of immediately when these things come up, I'm thinking of the kinds of things that do happen. And we have to make some adjustment because you can't, I mean, it's conceivable that you have a substitute coming in early in the year for maybe 3 or 4 days. And then that person doesn't, the teacher comes back and they're in for 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, these are usually medical issues other than pregnancy. Pregnancy can be part of it. And, but, you just don't know what's going on. And you pay at the rate as best you can. Then when you finally get down to a situation where that retroactivity might come up, but wait a minute, we have to sit down and look at each case as it happens.
and you want discretion to do that, so that's...
Well, I don't think I can get away from it, to be perfectly honest. If I could write this thing so that I never had to think about it, and that's what it is, I would do that. This is an issue that I want to be absolutely fair, but there can be so many ways in which these things play out. It's very hard to write a policy that is absolutely airtight. This at least gives us pretty good guidance, and we think it's reasonably fair.
I think we're thinking about situations like the teacher who we just approved the leave, who will be leaving in mid-October, and obviously whoever's coming in will be for the rest of the year. I mean, that's a pretty clean
That's-
example, and I don't think we can cover all
Yeah,
of it.
and obviously, I wouldn't argue, having just argued that because our contract didn't preclude a certain action, I wouldn't argue that we should try to write a 10-pager that would cover every possible situation. I'm okay.
Any
I don't know if anybody
further
else.
discussion? All in favor? 6-0.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion to enter executive session for the purpose of discussing negotiations. Ms. Mayor? So moved. Second. Charlie? Any discussion?
Second.
We already- All in favor? Okay, the meeting's adjourned.
Composer. They're tacked on after the fact by listeners who hear something specific and poetic. But the first symphony by Robert Schumann was the Spring Symphony.